Lesson 1. Introduction to SIAM. Welcome to Lesson 1. In this lesson, we're going to introduce service integration and management with topics including the history of outsourcing, the definition of SIAM, the different areas included in the SIAM methodology. To understand what SIAM is, we need to think about the history of business. Going back many years, most organizations were self-contained and carried out all their business activities internally, using their own staff and resources. They would, for example, have their own finance department, human resources department, and information technology department. In the 1970s and 1980s, organizations started to consider a new approach that will allow them to focus on their core business while taking advantage of specialist services from other companies. This was the beginning of external sourcing, or outsourcing, which was formally identified as a business strategy in 1989. We're going to use our first course exercise to think about why outsourcing was an attractive option to commissioning organizations, both in the public and private sector. Plan to spend 15 minutes on this exercise, and don't forget to check the suggested solution in your download documents. First, give 5 examples of services that can be outsourced. For example, invoice printing might be outsourced by a credit card company. Use your own experience if it's relevant. Then, make a note of some of the reasons why an organization might choose to outsource services. Try and think of at least 5 reasons. When you're ready, click the Next button to move on. As you will have considered in the previous exercise, there are many good reasons for outsourcing services. Some organizations only outsource simple services like bulk mailing, and others outsource more complex services and whole business functions like human resources. This has led to the growth of a type of outsourcing referred to as business process outsourcing, or BPO. BPO outsources an entire business process, such as accounting or payroll, to an external organization, including all of the services that support the process. When we look at a modern organization, either in the public or the private sector, we commonly see an organization that sources many of its services from external service providers. This gives them access to the benefits of outsourcing, but also introduces new problems that the organization needs to address. The customer or commissioning organization needs new capabilities to allow it to make effective procurement decisions and to manage its service providers and its contracts. The customer organization might also need to manage interfaces and relationships between service providers. Many customer organizations have struggled to manage their service providers successfully. They find themselves locked into long contracts that don't give them the service they need. If there is an issue that needs to be resolved, they find themselves managing arguments between service providers who are blaming each other for the fault. The model they adopt can make it difficult to add new service providers or remove existing ones, and organizational agility is hampered by the cost of contractual changes. This situation is where service integration and management steps in. You can see the definition of SIAM on screen here. SIAM has developed as a management methodology from the practices and experience of many organizations. It is a new way of working that helps to maximize the value realized from services that rely on a number of service providers. Adopting SIAM allows the customer organization to create an environment where each of the parties involved understands their role, their responsibilities, and the context in which they operate, what they are empowered to deliver, and what is outside their scope, what outcomes they are accountable for. The diagram you can see on screen now shows the way that many organizations currently operate. The customer organization is using services from a number of internal and external service providers, which allow it to meet the needs of business units and service consumers. For example, a bank might offer financial services to its business units and customers. These services might rely on different service providers for the financial database, the customer-facing website, application hosting, and more. The bank is in the middle, commissioning services from suppliers to meet demand from its service consumers. SIAM differs from traditional outsourcing because it introduces the concept of a service integrator. This is defined as a single logical entity, held accountable for the end-to-end delivery of services and the business value that the customer receives. SIAM can be used by organizations large and small, in both public and private sectors. The only type of organization that won't really benefit from adopting a SIAM approach is one that has only one service provider, as there is nothing to integrate. As you saw in the diagram on the previous screen, SIAM can be applied to external service providers, internal service providers, or a mixture of both. The more service providers a customer organization has, and the more complex its services, the more value it is likely to derive from adopting SIAM. The SIAM methodology includes practices, processes, functions, roles, structural elements. Some of these we will study in more detail later in the course. For now, click on each one to learn more about it. Remember, you need to complete each part of this lesson before you will be able to move on to Lesson 2, so make sure you review each item. A practice can be defined as the actual application or use of an idea, belief, or method, as opposed to theories relating to it. Within SIAM, there are practices that support governance, management, integration, assurance, and coordination of end-to-end services. For example, later in the course, we will study a process practice. This will address what an organization needs to do to integrate processes across service providers. A process is a documented, repeatable approach to carrying out a series of tasks or activities. SIAM is often mistakenly referred to as a process. SIAM itself is not a process, but it does use many processes that are usually found in organizations. In a SIAM environment, you will find common processes like change management and incident management. To make these processes effective, the service integrator needs to adapt and augment them so that they can be applied across the different organizations in the SIAM ecosystem. A function is an organizational entity, typically characterized by a special area of knowledge or experience. The service integrator layer of a SIAM ecosystem will be organized into functions to allow it to carry out its governance, management, assurance, integration, and coordination roles. Every organization will organize itself differently, so there's no one ideal organization chart for a service integrator. The functions will depend on their role and responsibilities. Roles and responsibilities ensure that every element of a SIAM model has a clearly defined scope of work. Roles and responsibilities need to be defined, established, monitored, and approved where necessary. If roles and responsibilities aren't clearly defined, there can be negative consequences. Work might not be carried out, tasks might be duplicated, and levels of authority may be unclear. A structural element is an organizational entity that has specific responsibilities and works across multiple organizations and layers in the SIAM ecosystem. They can include staff from the customer organization, the service integrator, and the service providers. They play a vital role in building relationships and improving communication between all the parties in the SIAM ecosystem. We'll add a full list of the role of structural elements in a SIAM model to your study guide for this lesson, which you will need to review. There are three types of structural element defined in the SIAM management methodology. They are boards, process forums, working groups. We're going to review their definitions now. A board is used to provide governance in a SIAM ecosystem. They are formal decision-making bodies and are accountable for the decisions they take. They convene regularly and operate at strategic, tactical, and operational levels. Examples of board activities could include Strategic Board, approves funding, sets strategy. Tactical Board, approves policies. Operational Board, identifies and implements service improvements within the scope of its authority. A common example of a board is a Change Advisory Board, which reviews and approves changes to services and processes. A process forum, as the name suggests, is aligned to a particular process or practice area. process forums generally carry out proactive work related to innovation and improvement. This could include, for example, developing data and information standards for sharing process information between organizations, developing, sharing, and improving common work practices. For example, an incident management process forum might carry out work to create a standard definition for incident severity that all service providers could align with. You can see examples of the relationships in some common process forums here. The process owner from the service integrator will attend, often acting as the forum chair. The service provider process owners will attend to share practices and suggest improvements to shared work areas. The final type of structural element is a working group. Working groups are reactive, convened when needed to address specific issues or projects. A working group will include staff from different organizations and, where required, different specialist areas. For example, a major incident working group could be convened during a system outage. It would include incident management staff from various organizations, technical staff, managers, and more as required. Staff members from the service integrator or the service providers will often be involved in process forums and working groups, addressing different areas of their role. For example, a problem management process analyst might attend the process forum to identify process improvements, as well as a working group to look at a specific problem. If it makes sense, the process forums and working groups can be combined to save time and reduce the number of meetings. If this does happen, it's important to make sure that the reactive work doesn't dominate the meeting. Proactive work must take place as well. Click on the Next button to access your end-of-lesson quiz when you're ready. The end-of-lesson quizzes are simple, multiple-choice questions to test your recall of the lesson you've completed. If you find the quiz challenging, you might need to repeat the lesson or contact your tutor with any questions. When you finish the quiz, click the Next button again to move on.